Hey Netcode-Hub community, Frederick is here. I am back with another exciting tutorial. In our previous video, we explored running the .NET Web API connected to SQLite in Docker. So if you haven't checked that one out, check this video description and you can have that video link in there. Today, we are taking it up a notch by connecting our Web API to SQL Server and running everything as a Docker image. Whether you are a seasoned developer or just started out, this tutorial is packed with valuable insight to streamline your development process. Let's dive in and see why this setup is a game changer for modern web development. Imagine you are working on a complex application that requires a robust database solution. Well, SQLite is great for lightweight applications and development. But as your application grows, you need a more powerful database like SQL Server. Running SQL Server and your Web API in Docker containers allow you to create a consistent and isolated environment, making development, testing, and deployment smoother and more efficient. Plus, it simplifies the setup process across different machines and environments. So let's start this project by first launching our Visual Studio 2022 or higher. And after that, we're going to create project. As you can see from the screen, mine is launched already. So you need not to relaunch it. Now let's create project. So click on create new project to create this project. Give it a name to the project, and we're going to choose the ASP.NET Core template. So give it a name, and that is the name that I'm giving to mine, Demo Web API with SQL Server in Docker. Choose location where you want to keep or you want to store this project, and that is going to be for this location. I know what I'm doing, C drive. Okay, aside from that, click on next to get this project created. Now before we click on the final stage of the project creation, we need to check, let's include Docker support, because at the end of the day, we're going to generate a Docker file for this. So we can add it here, or we can add it when the project is created. I've shown you how to add it here in the previous video, that is connecting SQLite. And it's quite simple. Click on Enable Container Support, and I choose the OS as Linux. We have our Docker file created, and that's going to be the container build type. Aside from that, you can also add it. So for now, I'm going to uncheck this. I'm not adding it. I'll add it when the project is also created. That is also another way of doing that. So let's click on create to get this project created. So you can see that the project is created, and if I click on my solution, you can see I have my project source here. If you don't find the solution explorer, you go to views and you can find it in here. Good. Now in here, we can also add a Docker file as well. Let's see. So I click on your project and I'll go to add. So go to add. Now you can see that here we have Docker support. So you can click on this, and now this is going to give you the pop-up as we saw when creating. And I will choose the container OS. We choose the file type. And now the container image, that is a default of 8.0. So we can choose this 8.0. Then where we want to build this context, so Docker build context, and that is in our solution, our project. We want to add it to our source, right? So we choose our project in here. Now let's click on OK. This is going to add a Docker file to this, and there you go. We have the file in here. So there's our Docker file that we have. Great. Now the main focus here, it is to show you how you can run Web API and SQLite database connected as image in Docker, but not to show you how to create your repository, how to perform CRUD in database, connect to database, and a whole lot. Okay, so maybe I decided I'll skip that. But well, how do I skip it? It's quite simple. Let's use a scaffolded version of this so we can have a CRUD operation. So that's what I'm going to do. All I need to do here is to create my model. So let's add a folder here, and I'll name this as models. Now this model, let's create a model here and I'll name it as maybe a product. Well, specify yours. I have mine as product usually. Now with this product, I'm going to have some third properties, and that is what we did in the previous video. So I'm going to have my ID, that is automatic phone ID. Then I'm going to have another one, maybe that's going to be name. I think that's talking about product. You cannot go without mentioning name, isn't it? What again? You're going to have description. So you have our description. Then I think we can add maybe quantity. You cannot have product without having quantity. And you're talking about price, so you can add this price to yours. Okay, so add the price to yours. Okay, then we are done. So the next thing I'm going to do here is let's go to click on the project. Then we're going to add. Let's choose this new scaffolded item. Click on that. Now, aside from that, you can see we have all templates in here that we can scaffold. Now we want to work with an API because this is an web API, so we choose web API. Now when you choose this web API, you can see when you come to API, we want to have all the CRUD operations with EF core. So choose the last one, which will give us create CRUD endpoint, giving a model class and a database context. So now we have the model class already, so we need not to create that. But for database context, you do not have it, so it's going to generate it, or we're going to create ourselves in here. We'll just click, and now we are good to go. This is quite simple. Yeah, it's interesting to use this scaffolded version. Click on add, and now let's add this. Now we're going to have a pop-up, and yeah, we have it. So let's choose the class for ourselves. A class here, it is product, so choose yours. Now, what is the endpoint? Now, the endpoint that you want to create, you can click on this, and where do you want to create this endpoint? Maybe let's add a new one. So product endpoint. This is going to use, I think, a minimal API. So let's use product endpoint. Click on add. So this is going to create a class and name it as product endpoint. Okay. Now aside from that, you can change this to any name of your choice. Then let's go for a DB context. You see that we did not create any DB context, so we can create one from this plus. Now give it a name. Well, so this is a demo web API DB context. That is a context type with a name. Well, maybe if this is too long, we can clear this. And then maybe this is a product DB context. Okay. So this is the one that I am customizing. Product DB context. So click on add. Then you have your context class also created. Now, what is the database provider? Now, we are not going for SQLite, we're not going for PostgreSQL or Azure Cosmos DB. We want to work with the SQL Server. So that is chosen already. Click on add. Now, this is going to run this. Okay. So we're going to use the minimal API from this endpoint class. Then we're going to be using it with the OpenAI support and with the type results. Click on add. And now this is going to work. Install a scaffolded version package. Install the EF core tools and the SQL Server itself, as you can see from here. Then OpenAI, and I'm going to update dependencies, information, and then after that, it's going to generate this endpoint for us automatically by the package that it has installed. So let's wait while it is first building the project, making sure that all packages are installed, everything is running smoothly before tackling the creating or scaffolding the endpoint for us. Oh, such amazing. So if yours is done successfully, you must have something similar to what I have. Do you have it? Well, I believe you do. That's great. So you can see that the class name that we provided, it is what we have in here. Product endpoint. It is using minimal API. And I want to check this. You see we have this endpoint created and we have everything. So we first map the group with a tag of product. So this group here, it is what we're going to be using to create others. So if I go for group, it means I am having API API/product already. So this is going to be API/product because here we have no extension made. Then when it comes to this, it is by ID. So API product/ID. We're going to give you get product by ID. And in that, you see we have the various names in there. We have put, that is an update product. And now you specify your ID. And I specify the product that you want to update. Then it's going to use this ID to search for this. And now make an update in here. So you can see that new features of update of add has been added. Check this. Now execute update async, and that is where you have your extension in it. You can specify the property that you want to update it, and that is all. So you can see that here you need not to use appdb content.save changes. It's going to be executed for you automatically in this set property. And now, well, you're good. You see, so it is when it comes to add, after that add, you have the save changes async, but for update, you do not. Now for delete too, do you have it? Nope. What of when you go to get, for get and for get by ID, get list, you don't need to use save because you're not saving anything. We are returning. And now it is increasing performance by adding as no tracking. So in default EF core tracks process that or records that you pull out from database so that you can make changes easily when you execute the update command. Now if I click on get, we are just getting the data, and aside from that we are doing nothing. So instead of issuing a tracking system or mechanism to this, we can discard that to improve the performance of the CF core. Well, yes, it's very necessary. Okay, so we have an endpoint here created nicely and beautifully, and we did not do this. It saves us a whole bunch of time, isn't it? Now have a look. When you go to your app settings, let's see what we have. We see that our database has been added automatically for us. We have our product DB context, and is using this local DB MySQL database, and this is a database name, right? We have everything in place, intact. Now since we're going to have this, we can reformat this. It did not add migration, so after you've done creating this, you have to specify perform migration. Okay, so this is what we need to do. We're going to modify this a little bit to see what we want. For me, I have my local, so I'll make it as local already. I'll remove this one. Then database is product DB. Aside from that, let me remove all this good from it. Transact connection is true as always. Multiple active resource sets, we can remove this. What I can do here is I can add trust server certificate and set this to true. So this is my simplified version, and it's going to work. You can maintain the default one and add trust server certificate to it to make it work. Alright, so now that we have this, let's go in and perform our migration. Okay, but I did not show you this. When you go to the program.cs file, the registry or the starting unit, you can see that it has added the SQL Server connection as our product DB context, and in that it has also mapped the endpoint that we created. Good, so we have these two things done here. Alright, so everything is set and done. Let's build migration in here. So in order to do that, let's first right click on this, rebuild solution to make sure everything is intact. Then we're going to perform migration, so click on package manager console. If you don't find yours, go to tools, and definitely going to have it inside. You can have this developer command prompt, PowerShell, you can use any of them, or you get package manager, then package manager console. You got it? So click on, we can clear this, then add migration. I like using first as a starting point. Such amazing. This is also done. Now let me also rebuild this project to make sure the migration file that it created is active. Let's wait. Yep, it is. Definitely should be. Now let's update the database. So update database. Yes, and that is done. So if I run my choose HTTPS, and now in here we're going to run this. So if we run this project now, we're going to have our CRUD endpoint with our product model integrated, and with this we can perform all the CRUD operations in our controller. Okay, maybe I did not show you the controller. So we have, that is the endpoint. So this time around, we are not using the controller itself. We're not using the traditional controller. We are using the endpoint. Okay, so let's wait and see while this runs. Oh yeah, it is ready. So if I click on get product, I must see list, empty list, to tell us that, well, this is working and it is actually connected to the database. So it is still in the execution process. Let's wait patiently for it. Yep, we have it. Now let's add a default record. So we're going to execute the add with the default record in here, and it is added. Let's add more. Okay, so we're executing about 10 or 20 in here. Now when we click on get, we must have all these records. Great, and now we have it. So this tells you that our API is working and it is connected to an SQL Server, which is also working 100%. Great. As soon as we get connected to our Docker in an SQL, we have the SQL file created or the migration done here. And now when we create it in our image or in our container, that is a Docker, it has to also perform migration. It has to update the database. So how do you do it? We need to create a class which will be responsible for that when we run it in the Docker by creating Docker Compose file and now initializing the file by using Docker Compose app. This will just, after creating this, it will just perform this to get the database migrated. Now let's see how we can do that. So we need to we can close this because we are done testing it for here. Let's close this. And maybe we can create a class and name it as, I can put it in where we have the migration, or, okay, so migrations. Then let's add a class to this. And it says that this is migration service. Now this migration service, what are we going to do? Let's create a public static class. What name are you going to give it? Initialize migration. Well, that is mine. And now with this, we need to specify application builder. Let's say this is app. Then in that, let's be using this so that I can just close the context as soon as this is done. Okay, so we have using var service scope. Let's get our service scope. So app dot, then we can have we have an issue here because we forgot to add void. Okay, so that is a public static. You should make it as a void. Great. Then app dot, then we're going to have access to our application service dot. Let's create a scope first. So create scope in here. Now after we have the scope created, we're going to use this scope to get a service provider and then get service type of the DB context class that we have created. So we say that service scope dot service provider dot get service. Now from this service, we need to provide a product DB context. So the context that you created, you make sure you put it in here. Now this can return null. So let's check it out. Dot, we can have extra database and now migrate. That is the key thing that we need from here. The reason why I did not use migrate async here, this is the static and we are not using await here. So we cannot be using the async. Make sure you have this straight ahead. Okay, so this is all that we need to do. And I believe you've done that. Copy this. Let's go to our program.cs file. You do this when you want to create a Docker image. Then after the app is built, since a static class, you can reference it straight ahead by using the namespace. And we need not to register this because a static class, we can go ahead and I'll say migration service dot initialize migration. And after the app is built, you can pass in the app as a parameter. That's great. We're done. Now, what is the next thing that we need to do after creating this? You know, at times, since you're going to run this in an HTTP, not HTTPS. In HTTPS, we have to include certificate. We have to reference the certificate, and you have to allow the specific port that you want to run on. You know, default HTTP port runs on 80, and HTTPS runs on 443. So if you want to make it run 443, we need to first trust the certificate. We need to actually provide the certificate itself, and then we need to specify this. Maybe you're not doing that for now in here. Let's run on the default port of HTTP. In that, you do not need any to run any certificate because that is the default, that is a basic one. Okay, so in order to do that, let's first comment this, return, use this redirection. At times it might give us some issue, but well, let's comment this for issue's sake. Good. Now we need to add policy. Why? Because you know our API is going to be in an image form whereby we're going to have access to it from our application. That is our browser. So in order for us to get communication, we need to add calls so we can get our CRUD endpoint. We can access them. So we can do that after or before the app build. And let's say this is builder.services. So let's first add the services. So .add calls. And now with this course, maybe we can give it allow origins. Okay. After that, we need to specify options. So here, let's make it a simple option like this. Okay. So now with this option, we can say that this option dot add. We can add policy. We can also add default policy. Okay, so let's add policy. Now you can make it as default so that it cuts across all registration that you're going to create or all requests that comes in. So let's make it. Let's specify this. We can use option dot add policy. I know there's a mistake in here. Yes. So the name here shouldn't be at this end. It should be from the specific policy that you want to add. So this should be a policy name. Okay, so we can clear this off. And now that is where we're going to have access to this add policy. Now that's where we need to specify the policy name. And the policy name here, that is allow all origins. Okay, now with this, we need to specify, let's have builder. Now with this, we can also make some specification in here. So we say builder.allow any origin, because we might not know the type of request or the path which is going to access it. It might be from web application, it might be from maybe a Blazor application, it might be from other applications, okay, with different ports. So when we specify or when we make explicit to a specific port or a specific address, it tells you that only the address can have access to this when the app runs as an image in the Docker. Well, in some cases where you want to limit the number of access, you can specify this in here so that it will just reject the extra ones. But for this, we want to make it global, universal, so that even you can have access to it from here. You see? So that's the reason why I need to use it. Any method is acceptable. Then not only that, any header also acceptable. The last one, allow any method. So all the CRUD endpoints, get, post, put, delete, allow every one of them. Okay, so when we are done, this is the third policy that you want to add. Okay, now after doing that, let's use this policy. So copy this, let's terminate this. Then on top of this, policy must come. So let's add app.use course. Then what is the name that we created? Allow origin. So we are done setting our policy or allowing calls in the application. Good. Now let's go to our Docker file and I'll see what we're going to do. So in our Docker file, we want to know this is HTTP, this is HTTPS. So we want to maintain the HTTP, so we can clear this HTTPS to simplify the code. And there's a default thing that we need. The first thing here, we're going to have it from as a base using the .NET as 8.0. Aside from that, we're going to have in a different phase of build. And this stage is used to build a service project. So here it's going to build a project. After building this, it's going to copy the project file. So this is CSproj. Then it's going to copy to the project in here. So you can see that anytime that the project is built, it creates a working directory, and that is what is creating it here. This is the default user that it is using. Then you create a directory. After that, it's going to copy this, and at the end, copy everything. So copy all in case you have any, if your API depends or uses any extra C# class libraries, it's going to copy them as well. Then this stage is used to publish a service project to be copied to the final stage. So it's in stages. In the final stage, we need to also publish it. Then we set the build configuration to release. Defaultly here it is in debug mode, but at this stage, it's going to set this to release, as you can see from the various lines. Then the final stage, we're going to run this as an entry point. We're going to run our DLL. That is a library file for our project. Great. Now this other thing you should do, we're not going to touch this because this is automatically created for us. Okay, so we are good. Now let's save this. The next thing that we're going to do here is, in order for us to create our application, to run this application and run an SQL, because we're going to run an SQL Server image. We're going to also run our web API, this app that we are creating. We're going to also run the image. We're going to have two images running at the same time, and in that we need to connect them together. So in a normal application, you have your app settings, and that is going to be the environment. You can specify your connection strings and a whole lot of settings, right? We need to also create the same thing for our image, which is going to be lying in the container. So in that, we need to create a Docker compose file that we can use to run both images. And in that, we can also specify some options or environment that each going to use in setting up or configuring its processes. So let's see. In solution, we have our Docker already. So I click on this. Let's add YAML file. So click on add new item. Then click on the YAML file, YAML. Now this, let's give it a name as Docker Compose. So with the version of 2.7 and above, you need not to specify the version. Else, you need to specify the version. But for this, I'm not going to specify the version. In the previous video, I shown you how you can check for that. Maybe I also show you this as well. So launch your PowerShell, or you can even use the package manager console. And now with this, before we can check the version, all that you need to do here is to type in Docker Compose -- version. Now with this, it's going to give you the current version of your compose file in here. So you can see that's a 2.27. So all versions which have 2 and higher, we need not to specify the version in here. Other than that, we need to specify version. But well, version here have 3.8, but we are not doing that in here. So we can go ahead, we can skip that, and I'll start with our services. So these are services. In our services, we want to have our web API. So that's the name that I'm giving to my application, web API. So with this web API, what am I doing? I'm going to build it. So on the build stage, I want to specify. So the arrangement is also very important. So we should not. Let's specify context. This comes under context, and we're making up two. We need to add Docker file as well. Dockerfile and context on the same line under the build, because that's where we need to specify each of them. Now let's create a Dockerfile for this. And that was a Dockerfile. Maybe I can say SQL, well, my API with SQL Server version 1. Okay, so my API with SQL Server version 1. You can do this, or we can actually use, well, underscore to separate this and make this more readable. SQL Server is together, my API with SQL Server version 1. Okay, so now that we have a Dockerfile created, let's specify the, oh, we're making another mistake too. This should be the Dockerfile in the project. What's here? So this is a Dockerfile that created Dockerfile, so we need to specify that one in here. And I want to go to the next line. That is where we need to specify the image. And this image comes under the web API, okay, in corresponding with the build. So in order, let me just give enough space to this. Okay, then here, this to this build. Okay, good. So with this build, we can specify the image, and now the image is what we need. So this is going to be the custom image name that we are giving to our API. Now, aside from this, we need to specify the port, and this is also coming from this. So let's specify the port. Now the port, we're using only a single port, that's an HTTP port. So we need not to specify much. What we're going to do here is we can use 5002, that's a custom port, and now we are binding it to the 80, that's the default HTTP port. Okay, so now let's create our environment too. So here, the next one, we create our environment. Now this environment should be in line with the port. And now we need to remove this. Okay, so with this environment, the first thing we need to specify here is, let's specify our ASP.NET Core URLs. So underscore U, we have URLs. And on the URLs, we need to specify the first type, that's an HTTP, because that is what we need in here. Then we have the default port of 80. So that is 80. And that is what we need. So we are specifying the port of 80. Then after that, we need to specify the development environment. So maybe we can add another one. ASP.NET Core. What this should be? ASP. Okay, so .NET Core environment. And this environment should be development. Okay. Then we need to create our connection strings, because you know in our settings, when creating the file on our system, before we did the migration, we created our connection string in the app settings. We need to also specify that in here. So let's have our connection strings. Then in this connection string, we give it a name that is a default connection. Okay, so default connection. Then we set this to SQL Server. So this is our connection, this is our server. So before this, we need to specify the server. And the server is an SQL Server. After this, we need to specify database. And what's the database? Maybe that's a product DB. Then we need to specify a user. So user ID. We are using the default user ID, that is as a system administrator. Then let's specify password. What's the password that you want to use? Maybe Netcode-Hub 2020. 4. Yes. Okay, let me just clear all these empty spaces. Okay, so we have a password specified, and the last one here, we need to trust the connection as well, trust certificate. So let's say this is trust server certificate. So you can see that it's the same thing that we are doing in there, and let's set this through as well. Okay, so this is our connection string that we need to specify. Now when we are done with this, we need to create a dependency. We know this application is going to depend on which one? SQL, right? So this is going to depend on, so we can specify depend on, and now this depends on this app. It is depending on, we have an SQL server. So SQL server, we got a name from our server here. You could add a server for a database. Okay, so this is coming from the, and should be in line with the environment. Great. Okay, so the next thing that we're doing here is we're going then to specify the SQL server. And this is for our API. Let's go there. Now this API and now the SQL server must be under the services. So you can see from here we started our web API. So we must also start our service in there. Okay, so on the line like this. Let's see. Can give another space. Then another one maybe. Then here let's specify an SQL server. So SQL server. So you can see that this is in line with the web API. When you check it, it is in line with the web API, right? Now aside from that, when you have a server, we need to specify the image. So this image, now the image is going to be the MCR Microsoft MCR dot, that's a Microsoft. Then we have .com slash MySQL Microsoft SQL. Then we're going to have our server. Now this server, we're using the latest version 2022-latest. That is what we're using. Okay, so this is an image. Now if you don't have this image in Docker, it's going to pull it from the Docker-Hub, so don't worry. Make sure you are connected to the internet, and now you're good to go. Great. Now with this too, it needs an environment that we need to specify. So let's specify an environment for this. Now for the environment variable, we need an SA password. We need system administrator password. So SA password. And now the SA password, all that you need to do is specify here is to specify or to use the password that we created. It must be uniform. Okay, and we need accept. We need to accept the terms. So let's also set this to normal terms, that is yes. So set this to Y. Let's specify our port for SQL Server to run on. So maybe let me give you now space. Okay, so after that, the next line is port. So for our port, what do we need to set? Okay, so from the port, we need the default port of 1433. 1433. We need our port. Then let's specify our volume. Let me remove this. So volume, and now within our volume, we need an SQL server. So okay, so in here let's have an SQL server data, and the location MySQL. Okay, now general volume, we need to specify our general volume. So here we have our web API, and we have a SQL server. So what is the volume that you want to set up? Volumes. And now with these volumes, you want to specify SQL Server data. So this is this one that we created. Let's make reference to this. So with you doing this, it means you are done with that compose file. Okay, so this is going to run. We're going to run this. Now, in order to do this, we need to first install a Docker desktop. So the question is, why do we need to use Docker? Imagine you are a developer working on a complex web application. Your application needs to run on multiple developer machines, each with slightly different configurations. You might be using Windows, whilst your colleagues will be also using macOS, and another team member will be using Linux. Setting up the same development environment on each machine can be a nightmare. Yes, of course. You need to ensure that every machine has the correct version of .NET, SQL Server, and other dependencies, making it very complicated and tedious. Even small differences in configuration can lead you to dreaded problem. That is where Docker comes in to rescue. Docker allows you to package your application and add dependencies into a container, which is a lightweight, standalone, and executable package. Containers ensure that your application runs consistently across different environments. So going to this link will get you the Docker desktop so that you can install this. No matter which OS that you're using, Docker desktop, you can install it on Mac, Linux, and also Windows. So when you come here, you see we have Mac, Linux, and Windows. That is https:/docs.docker.com/desktop. This simple link will just navigate you to this page whereby you can download any of them based on your specific OS that you're using. Okay, so now that we have this set, when you install the Docker and run it, you must get something like this. So this are going to have all containers running. Currently we don't have any container running, so we have everything in here. Okay, and I can see here it is also running. The engine is running, it's working. Now, in order for us to work with this, all that you need to do here is we need to navigate to the project root folder. Okay, and in that, let's see. So from here, you can right click on your project, then go to open folder in File Explorer. Well, we are in. So the next thing we're going to do here is you see we have a Docker compose file and we have a Docker file in here. We're going to move this file. We go to where we have our solution, and now let's drop them here. So after you are done with this, we can start working or building the project. So in order to do this, let's first build this again. So rebuild solution. But before we do that, let's go to, we created a different setup in the Docker compose file, right? And that is it. So the connection that we have in here, the connection name should be default connection, isn't it? So let's grab the default connection. Let's go to our app settings. Then let's have another one. So this is going to be default connection. And now in here, we can use the server, the database, the username, and everything. So I'm going to grab all this. Then let's go to app settings. And now let's paste it up in here. Okay. Now with this, we're going to comment this for now and maintain the default connection. Let's grab the default connection. Then we go to our program.cs file and let's choose the default connection here. This is necessary when building this in Docker. So once you're done with this, we can go ahead and rebuild it already. Now you need not to perform any migration. We can create a migration file which is created already. So we need not to build any migration again. Anytime that we run this in Docker, it's going to update it, the file which has been created already, and create a database and everything for us. Okay, so now this is ready and set. Now I'm going to pull out my terminal. You can use the console as well. Okay, so with this, I need to cd. Let me go back again. And now here, I can specify my cd project, and that is a folder. So I want to locate to the current project. Okay, so if I talk about the current project, I'm talking about this one. So I want to come here. Okay, so that's what I'm navigating up to. So I have my project, and I'm going to copy the name of this because that is a project name. Then in my terminal, I'm going to say cd. Now if I type in ls, I'm going to have the view of this. So you can see I have my Docker Compose file. I have my Docker file. We are interested much in this Compose file because this Compose file is going to work. You're going to pick the Docker file and I'll work on it. So once you have this, you can just clear. Then all that you need to do here is you're going to build this first. So let's say Docker Compose, then build. Maybe you can build this and run it on the same line, but let's take it step by step. So let's build this project. Now it's going to use it's going to download the SDK, and now we're going to go through the process or the stages in the Docker file that we created. Okay, and it's going to work on that. So after that, it's going to install all the necessary files that you need to work on this. So let's wait patiently while this is building a project for us. And after building this project, we should have the project in our Docker container. So now you can see from here we have when you go to images, I have only my SQL Server running in here. I have downloaded this already, but I'll show you how to do it, and this is going to do it. The Docker Compose file, since we specify the image, if you don't have it already, it's going to download it from the Docker-Hub, so no problem, you're going to have it. Okay, then you must see our web API. My web API, you must see it here. So let's wait for this build to finish, then we see that. Well, and that is finished. So you can see that it went through 18 processes, and you can see we have finished. So everything is working and it is fine now. So we have an API, and I want to check our Docker container. You can see that we have my API with SQL Server v1. So this is version 1, right? This is the size, and currently the status here is unused and unused. So we are not using them. Now, how do we use them? That is the reason why we need to use Docker Compose up to utilize this. Now it's going to also run the server itself and our project, our web API. So let's see our Docker Compose. Now app. So as soon as I click on app, let's see. For now, this happening in the container, no, the images. If I click container, there's nothing created. But let's wait and see what this code is going to do. So Docker Compose app. Now see what's going to happen. Yes, so you can see that we have our API created in a container. And now we're going to run our API and the server. So if we have an SQL Server, we have our web API. So when you check it, you can see it is ready, and now it is listening on the port of which is mapped to 80, what we provided, and that is a 5002. So in our browser in here, we can use. So we have an HTTP. We have a local host, and the port here is 5002. Then Swagger, we have an index, and now let's try to access this and see whether our image is running. Yes, of course. And now the image here, it is running. You can see that here we are not running this project, but we can still access our web API. Now let's test and see if it is connected to database. So let's see. Try this out. Execute this. And now when we check the console, you might see some information in here. Yes, so select. We have it. Now we can also add. Now you can see from this we have empty list. Let's add product. Let's maintain the default. And now from our console, you can see here we have execute command, and now let's see whether we have our insert. Good. So you can see we have an insert to product, and we have this. Great. We have one added. We can execute more. and all of these you're going to have them in a query form in here. Aside from that, when you go to get, you can also have it from here. So you can see it is working. When you go to the Docker component and in here, if you click on the API, maybe we can have the logs in here. Yes, so we have all the logs in here as well. Alright, so that is all. We've seen how we can actually fully connect our web API to SQL and run both images in Docker, and it's running smoothly. This setup not only enhances your development workflow, but also prepares your application for scalable, production-ready deployment. Don't forget to like, share, and subscribe to the Netcode-Hub channel for more awesome tutorials. If you have any questions too into running this, you can put it in the comment section and I'll be glad to attend to you. Alright, so I'm going to catch up again. Till then, take care and happy coding.